the aura of invincibility. We're talking about a select few fighters in the history of combat sports that made fans feel like they were never going to lose. I'm talking about something that transcends just technique and skill. I'm talking about an intangible aura or a sort of atmosphere. And it's no mystery as to why it's a rare quality to have in combat sports, where one mistake can lead to you getting KO'd or submitted. For example, take a fighter that was in his prime that looked unstoppable, have him get KO'd a couple of times, and that guy just doesn't inspire the same kind of feeling in the fans. He doesn't have the same atmosphere about him when he fights. In this video, I'm going to talk about the few people that genuinely seemed invincible, like they were never going to lose, and I'm going to tell you guys why people felt like they were never going to lose. So let's just get into this video. Kamaru Usman, the Nigerian nightmare. We're not just talking about the Usman that just lost to Leon Edwards twice. I'm getting at prime Kamaru Usman. I'm talking about Usman on the come up. One of the scariest fighters in UFC history. Let me put it this way. If you're a hardcore MMA fan today, then you've probably heard people call guys like Shavkat Rakhmonov or Umar Nurmagomedov boogeyman. This is the type of thing that people were saying about Kamaru Usman on the come up as well. Nobody wanted that fight. And if you don't believe me, go out there in the internet and scour around trying to find me a Kamaru Usman call out. You're not going to find one because they don't exist. Let me describe what a Kamaru Usman fight would look like. You'd see Kamaru Usman enter the fucking building with the Nigerian flag draped over his shoulders, dancing, African music, blaring on the loudspeaker, and it looking like he's about to hit the fucking club. And again, this is what led to Kamaru Usman being so willing to just carry out his game plan and impose his will in the cage, because he was relaxed, he was confident. So what was it like to fight prime Kamaru Usman? Well, you're basically out there fighting a fucking juggernaut. You know, you're in the cage, you're shitting your pants, this guy's dancing on the walkout, and all of a sudden you're looking at a guy that is carved out of stone, that looks like a superhero. The bell rings and you're on the back foot right away due to the intimidation factor. And he had this unyielding march forward that felt inescapable. So you're getting backed up and you're catching piston-like jabs to the jaw. Eventually, you'd get cornered against the cage and Kamaru Usman would start unloading the kitchen sink on you. Big knees, elbows, nasty uppercuts to the body. The next thing you know, he's low on a double leg, picking you up, slamming you to the canvas. And if you were able to get up to your feet, congrats, he's just going to run the same program on you for 25 minutes straight. There was just hardly anyone that could keep up. So it's clear that Usman had the intimidation factor. He had the fight style. Well, what made people believe that he was never going to lose? Well, for starters, Kamaru proved very early on in his championship reign that he was capable of taking out nightmare matchups. For example, beating a high-level wrestler like Tyron Woodley that statistically had the best takedown defense in the UFC and wicked power in his hands. And not just beating him, demolishing him, racking up 18 minutes of control time and landing 141 strikes to Woodley's 32. Then you had the infamous mirror matchup with Colby Covington for Usman's first ever title defense. Again, on paper, both guys seemed pretty equally matched, but it was clear that Usman had the power and reach advantage, which ultimately led to him breaking Colby's jaw in half in the third round. And Usman, despite being down 3-1 going into the fifth, had inflicted so much damage on Colby's face that it didn't take much for him to drop Colby a few times in that last round to get himself a TKO. And of course, you could make the argument that, all right, well, you got tested. Usman got beat up in that fight as well. He didn't seem so invincible to me. Well, at the end of the day, I'm thinking about the fact that it was a nightmare matchup. I'm thinking about the fact that Usman showed that he can dig deep, that Usman showed that he can go to a dark place to pull out the victory over a guy that, again, is just always going to test him based on the matchup, based on the style. But then 2021 hit. Prime Kamaru Usman, one of the greatest peaks that any fighter has ever achieved in combat sports history, destroying Gilbert Burns, destroying Jorge Masvidal, and taking out Colby Covington again. Now, it's important for me to make note of this. Before the year 2021, people looked at Kamaru Usman like he was a juggernaut. Like, dude, this guy is going to be a dominant champion for a while. But he didn't necessarily have the aura of invincibility. It was that year, 2021, that took him to the next level. And I would go as far as to say that the most impressive version of Kamaru Usman was the one that fought Gilbert Burns at UFC 258. Going into that, a lot of people were criticizing Kamaru Usman for holding on for dear life on Jorge Masvidal. They saw him get tested by Colby Covington, and they were looking at Gilbert Burns as a nightmare matchup. This is a guy that's going to nullify the wrestling of Kamaru, because we're talking about an ADCC level grappler. We're talking about a guy that's the big swinging dick of the jiu-jitsu community, and of course, someone that's faster twitch than Colby, someone that's more powerful. I mean, he just dominated Tyron Woodley on the feet, and he also dominated and knocked out Damian Maia in the fight before that. Now, little did they know Kamaru Usman was doing some serious work behind the scenes on his striking with Trevor Whitman. And so Kamaru goes into that fight, and he gets knocked down in the first minute. Gilbert Burns comes out guns blazing, no respect for Kamaru whatsoever, lands a big hook in the pocket. But 30 seconds later, Kamaru Usman's recovered. He catches a kick at Gilbert Burns. He throws Gilbert Burns on the ground, doesn't choose to follow up because he respects the jiu-jitsu, and there's this 3-minute moment where Kamaru's kicking the legs of Gilbert Burns while Gilbert Burns is on his back. And it's looking like a bit of a pathetic display. It's like, sure, Usman got dropped, but he just kind of big brothered Gilbert Burns for the remaining 3 minutes of the first round. And so the second round comes, and all of a sudden, Kamaru Usman shows us something that we haven't seen before, and that is one of the nastiest jabs in MMA. He starts piecing up Gilbert Burns, going from southpaw to orthodox, just smashing Gilbert Burns' chin with jabs, and he starts dropping him. Gilbert Burns starts slowing down. He starts getting affected by the forward pressure. Usman's marching him down like a juggernaut. The third round comes around, and all of a sudden, Gilbert Burns has gotten dropped badly. Kamaru Usman is landing nasty hammer fists on him, and the fight ends. He just finished another nightmare opponent in dominant fashion. Literally only one moment where he looked somewhat human. Just mops the floor with Gilbert Burns, and nobody expected that. People thought that Kamaru Usman, if he were to win this fight, it might be a war. It might be an absolute scrap. He's going to have to do a whole lot of clinching. He might not be able to get the takedown, but not a single person thought he was going to go out there and fuck up Gilbert Burns with jabs to the point to where Gilbert Burns is falling all over the place. And this is something that really put people on notice because, again, going into this fight, his striking was being slept on, and for a good reason too. This is a guy that was carried by his physical attribute advantages. And now he had some nasty technique to go with it. And we're looking at a guy that's now taken out 2 nightmare matchups in Gilbert Burns and Colby Covington, and it's just getting easier and easier. He fights Jorge Masvidal next, who is just talking a load of shit on the sidelines, saying that Kamaru Usman doesn't have any power in his hands. He's got pillow punches. He was doing everything but trying to strike with me. What does Kamaru Usman do? He goes out there, he outstrikes Jorge Masvidal, pieces him up, makes him look like he's an amateur, and then knocks him out into the shadow realm, sends Jorge Masvidal's head flying off of his shoulders. And so Kamaru, a guy that was once getting criticized for going to too many decisions, is now out here smoking people with his hands, and he still has the wrestling. He still has the cardio. He still has the durability. Now he's fighting Colby Covington, and I could just imagine Colby Covington shitting his pants walking out to that next fight with Kamaru Usman, the rematch at UFC 268 at Madison Square Garden. I'm convinced pretty much damn near every MMA fan thought Kamaru Usman was going to knock Colby Covington out early in that fight. It honestly seemed like it was just a hopeless fight for Colby Covington to take, given how great Kamaru looked going into it. And he dominated the early rounds. He dropped Colby Covington in the second round multiple times, 10-8'd him. Some people to this day think Colby Covington won the last 3. I personally think that Kamaru Usman won the first 3 rounds, and it wasn't super controversial. And so either way, he has 3 wins in the bag, and people just didn't think that he was going to lose. If you were to tell me that Kamaru's going to get head kick KO'd by Leon Edwards in his next fight, I'm calling you a damn fool. Khabib Nurmagomedov, the most ferocious grappler in MMA history. Cultivated in the gritty mountains of Dagestan, Russia, a place where devotion to God takes precedence over all else. And boys get into combat sports from the moment they're able to walk. It's no mystery as to why Khabib's discipline was on another level. With a childhood consisting of nothing but wrestling and prayer, you'd better bet you were gonna get a fucking force to be reckoned with. And once Khabib got into the UFC, he was an absolute monster, tearing through names on the come up like RDA, Michael Johnson, and Edson Barboza, all being in their prime, and each performance being more dominant than the last, literally punching holes through these guys' faces and making them look like they've never grappled a goddamn day in their life. What made Khabib's grappling so impressive was that it seemed like he was 5 steps ahead of all of his opponents on the ground. And again, we're talking about guys that are constantly working on their grappling, regardless of whether or not they're fighting Khabib, like RDA, for example, who's known for being a good grappler. These guys are drilling escapes and scrambles during their training camps to prepare for Khabib, and when they'd actually try to pull these things off in the fight, if you were to try to get up to your feet, 9 times out of 10, you'd just fuck yourself over twice as badly because Khabib's arsenal on the ground ran so much deeper than yours that he'd have a counter for every move that you'd make. Essentially, it didn't matter what training you did, any resistance on the ground was just prolonging the inevitable, which was namely getting your face smashed into the canvas and eventually crumbling under the onslaught. And although we've seen grapplers like Charles Oliveira, for example, come into MMA and rack up record numbers of submissions, what made people view Khabib as a guy that was unbeatable was his ability to impose his will for just about every single second of the fight. Charles has had moments to where he's going back and forth on the feet with guys like Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, and Michael Chandler, who are obviously all monsters in their own right, but my point is that there are plenty of these moments where, as I said, Charles is the nail and his opponents are the hammers. I've genuinely never seen Khabib as the nail. And let me just give you guys some examples. Almost every single goddamn second of his fight with Conor McGregor was Khabib sucking Conor into his style of fight. Even in the 3rd round, a round in which Khabib lost, it looked like it was a pity round. It looked like the guy was just playing with his food. And you can say what you want. You could say, oh, but he lost the round. It doesn't matter, bro. You're looking at the statistics. I'm looking at the overall vibe of the fight. I'm looking at what was really going down. And to me, I'm looking at Khabib playing with his food. And against Dustin Poirier, almost every single second of that fight, aside from one big haymaker that Dustin lands in the 2nd round, it's just Khabib slowly but surely draining and mauling Poirier and taking his soul. Even in his fight with Justin Gaethje, round 1 specifically, did Khabib ever look like he was actually in danger? If you don't remember this round, I'll remind you, this is the one round that Khabib definitely lost. And this was not a round in which he lost that was like, round 3 of Conor where it looks like Khabib is playing with his food. This was a straight up L for Khabib in round 1. That being said, I still view it as a round in which there's one man breaking his opponent, and it's not Justin Gaethje breaking Khabib. Khabib obviously wasn't on the same level as Justin Gaethje on the feet, but he made it a point to walk Gaethje down with a level of pressure that we've hardly ever seen. And this dude was straight up running at Justin Gaethje, throwing flying knees, beckoning Gaethje on, slapping him around, all while taking big punches to the chin and eating vicious leg kicks. And although Justin Gaethje was landing the harder shots, Khabib was the one that was bringing Gaethje into his world. He was the one that was imposing his will. As I say, a war of attrition is something that you're constantly getting with Khabib. It's just who's the first one to break from this kind of pressure. And if you look at Justin Gaethje's body language after the 1st round, the guy's body language fell off of a cliff. I mean, we're talking about a guy that was rendered to a half-broken man that Khabib ultimately took down and submitted with ease in the 2nd round. I remember seeing Khabib beat these guys consecutively and thinking there's literally never been a better, more dominant fighter in history. And normally, seeing a guy retire in his prime would be disappointing, but Khabib's dominance was so fucking crazy that it almost seemed like it was pointless to even see him fight again, because we already kind of knew the outcome, or at least this is how the fans felt at the time. This is how the world of MMA felt about Khabib. It's like we felt as if he was never going to lose. all of his finishes got consecutively more impressive due to the fact that they just came quicker. Finishing Conor in the 4th, finishing Dustin in the 3rd, and Gaethje in the 2nd round. Like, the guy was clearly improving in front of our eyes. And of course, you could make the argument that Justin Gaethje is the worst grappler out of those 3 opponents, but nonetheless, he's making easier work of all of these killers. And as I said, he created an aura of invincibility. Nobody thought that Khabib was going to lose. And of course, you hear the term never bled, never been knocked down. So overall, Khabib is one of those guys that had the aura of invincibility, just like Kamaru Usman. He had the physical intimidation factor. He had the unrelenting will. And of course, the performances on top of that. Parker Porter, or called by many, the Beast. One of the greatest heavyweights of all time in UFC history that certainly had an aura of invincibility, a mystique about him. You walked in the room and you couldn't really figure out how this guy could possibly lose. One of the biggest punchers on the block. There is no denying that in the year 2020 to 2022, Parker Porter's 3-fight win streak is something that will hardly ever be replicated again due to how convincing, how terrifying these performances were over Josh Parisian, Chase Sherman, and the likes of Alan Badeau. Parker Porter's 3-fight win streak, cementing himself as one of the scariest fighters to ever walk the earth, is something that is going to go down in history. What is up, guys? It's Lucas Tracy MMA here, and I want to let you guys know that I have something for you, and that's a real food cookbook. Because if you're walking around looking like Chris Dawkins, you got to get that weight off. I don't know if you think you're DC or something, but most people usually don't perform at their best when they're walking around with 30% body fat. So if you're trying to lean out and you still want to eat good, tasty comfort foods, well, you could check out my Real Food Cookbook, because I've made it a purpose to have good, tasty foods that you can still eat just without all the processed bullshit, without all the processed ingredients like soy and seed oils. So guys, check out the Real Food Cookbook. Use code MMA for 30% off. The link is in my description. Don't forget that discount.